You should just charge what your competition is charging. Just figure out a set price and be consistent. Don't charge too much, but also don't charge too little. These statements are all overly simplifying what your service is worth. My name's Evan, and this is the Camera Dad CPA channel. If you're new here, I'm an accountant. I'm also a photographer and videographer. And if those statements have left you confused and unsure of what to charge, then this video is the right one for you. I'm gonna take a slightly different approach to teaching you what you should charge for your services. And that's going to be through teaching you some business concepts that are going to be vital for not only this as well as other business decisions. There's no way to shy away from it. Calculating what you should charge for your services is pretty complicated, and there are a lot of factors at play, but I'm going to help you navigate through this. But overall, I want to provide you with the tools that you need to determine this information instead of just chasing what the competitors are charging. I truly think that understanding some key business concepts is what's going to take you to the next level when you're competing against people with the same creative ability as you. For this video, I am going to be assuming that you've built up a solid portfolio because in the beginning, when you're trying to acquire clients, in a lot of cases, you're doing things for cheaper or for free, and you're putting in that sweat equity into your business, meaning that you're putting work in that's not fully compensated with the intentions of that being one day compensated. Doing work for free or for cheap is fine in the beginning, but you want to stay in that stage for a very short period of time, and you want to quickly get out of that. In fact, in terms of price increases, that is where you're going to see the most dramatic growth in your business is in the beginning up until that point where you've built a solid portfolio. As you're going to see in this video, understanding the accounting and finance side of your business is not going to only mean that you understand the numbers. There are a lot of factors at play that you can't necessarily quantify. So let's start this off by just playing catch up on a couple of key business concepts. The first one that I want to cover is opportunity cost. Now, opportunity cost is essentially the cost of making one decision over another. So for example, let's say you offer 3-hour wedding packages, and it's in the middle of primetime wedding season. You have somebody that books a Saturday. All right, so you're now booked for that day. Now, let's say somebody else comes along and they want to book your full 8 to 10 hour package. Now that you're booked for that day, you have a difference of, let's say, 5 hours between your two packages, and that has thereby reduced your revenue by that amount. We're in the service industry, so your time is valuable. Every hour that you work is your opportunity to earn money. Now, I'm obviously talking about the time that you've allotted to working. I'm all about work-life balance. I have a wife and 2 children, so I completely understand that. The next topic that we're going to talk about is the ways that businesses compete. There are 2 different ways: cost and differentiation strategy. So let's talk about that first one a little bit, the cost competitor. This is going to be the photographer, videographer that is charging less money, and that's the way they get clients. In the beginning, you're undoubtedly going to be a cost competitor because that's the way you're going to get clients. I hear a lot of people say, how do I compete with these low-cost photographers and videographers? And the answer is you don't. You are competing on a different level, and that is the differentiation strategy. By charging more, you're going to be able to invest more back into your business. And I don't mean just from a money perspective. I also mean from a time perspective. If you're charging double the price but working half as hard, that frees up more time for you to learn and hone in your skills so that you are able to separate yourself from the competition. This is a good time to address why I personally think that saying that you should charge what your competition is charging is faulted, because if you go to somebody's website and you're able to see their full price list, then that's more than likely their selling point. They are more than likely competing on cost. So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about everybody's favorite keyword, and that is the cost of doing business. This is an excellent place to start because at a minimum, you know you want to cover your cost when you're charging a client for something. Now, when we're talking about expenses, I'm not only talking about direct expenses like, for example, paying for gas to get somewhere or get to a gig. I'm also talking about those indirect expenses like wear and tear on your vehicle. While you may not be spending money at that point in time, it will require that you spend money in the future. Now, let's break up our expenses into 2 categories: variable and fixed. Variable costs fluctuate depending on the number of jobs that you take on. For example, like we mentioned before, gas is a variable expense. The cost of that's going to increase depending on how many gigs you're traveling to. And then the second shooter that you have, that's another example of a variable cost as well. And then you have your fixed cost. Now, those expenses are typically set for a year, and they're not going to fluctuate depending on the number of gigs that you get. Fixed costs can be the trickier ones to allocate on a per gig basis just because they're fixed for the entire year and it doesn't fluctuate based off the number of jobs that you do. Some examples of fixed costs are insurance, cost of your computer and equipment, studio space if you have one, and also hosting fees would also fall under this category. The reason we break costs down into 2 different categories, variable and fixed, is because you need to understand how those affect your prices. Variable costs, if you're trying to figure that out on a per gig basis, it's pretty easy. Something, for example, like Webflow, let's say I pay $5 per gallery that I host. Well, that right there, it's $5 per wedding that I shoot. And then understanding that the fixed costs are out there, that doesn't put you in a position where you are pricing out gigs and you're not factoring those in, because this is certainly a consideration. And back on allocating fixed costs, now there are a couple ways that you can do that. Now, if you typically shoot 20 gigs per year, your fixed costs would be divided by 20 gigs. Now, let's say you shoot 30 gigs. Okay, so now you're dividing your fixed cost by 30. And as you can tell, that amount per gig is going to fluctuate. That is a very simple method, and that's also going to be for somebody that all gigs for them are pretty similar in size. For example, if you're somebody that just offers one wedding package, and that's typically what you shoot for the year, then this would be the right approach for you. Now, if you are somebody that shoots all kinds of various things, whether it be family portrait sessions, weddings, allocating the same amount of money for a wedding as you do for a family portrait wouldn't be accurate. A slightly more complex way to allocate your fixed costs would be to figure out how many hours on average you spend shooting for clients, and then you can figure out that number on a per hour basis. So you just take your fixed cost, you divide that by the hours you plan to shoot for the year, and then you can allocate those to each gig based on how many hours you're going to shoot for them. The key thing here is to allocate fixed costs to your jobs in some form or fashion, because forgetting about those will ultimately result in you potentially charging a client less than you should. More to come on this later. I do plan on doing a full video on this, as well as releasing a tool that I use in my business. So now, after we've taken the time to go through our business and figure out what our costs are, how do we figure out how much we should charge a client? Well, there's one thing that we left off, and that is the compensation for our time and labor. So like I mentioned before, we're in the service business, so our time is what's going to generate us money. This is the subjective part of determining what your price is, but I like looking at this on an hourly rate perspective. You will have to experiment with this a little bit, as well as do some research, but the good thing about looking at it from this perspective is that we know what certain jobs pay, we know what minimum wages are, and if you're like me, I currently have a full-time job during the week, and I know what I'm paid for that. So that just gives me an idea of what I want to make from this position. And after you figured out what your hourly rate is going to be for your service, now you need to figure out how much time you spend on each job. Now, I'm talking everything. You need to figure out how much time you spend talking to the client, meetings and consultations, how much time you spend editing and shooting. I add all of this time up, and then it's pretty simple to figure out what your profit is going to be, because you're going to multiply your hourly rate by the time that you're going to spend on that client. And that's going to give you your pre-tax profit. I think for a lot of people, this part is going to be pretty eye-opening, just sitting there and determining how much time you spend per client. I know a lot of photographers and videographers think of gigs in terms of shooting time. Just for me personally, there are things like, it takes me a long time to pack up my equipment, and all of this is time that you're spending on each client. I know that once I've started looking at things from this perspective, I feel a lot more confident in quoting clients, because before, even for me personally being an accountant, I wasn't 100% sure what to charge for photography and videography. I listened to some videos and I kind of just pulled a number out of thin air. But from there, I wasn't really sure how much time I was spending on clients, what my costs were, but taking this approach has made me so much more confident in quoting numbers. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hop into an example. But before we do that, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. So in this example, we're just going to assume this person's a wedding videographer. Their fixed costs are $20,000 in gear that he shoots with. He's got a $3,000 computer. He has $3,000 per year in subscriptions, and those are for image and video hosting, website hosting, HoneyBook, all of that. He incurs $600 a year in gear and business insurance, and then $600 per year for all those Adobe subscriptions. His typical variable costs for a wedding are he has a second shooter that he pays $50 per hour. And for gas, he pays about $3 a gallon, and he gets 20 miles per gallon on his vehicle, which is 15 cents per mile. For wear and tear on his vehicle, I'm just going to estimate that at 35 cents per mile. Determining this exact number could be an entire video, but I think 35 cents is safe to assume. And let's just assume that he has one wedding package. He offers an 8-hour wedding package. He typically does 20 of those a year. These are typically 50 miles away, and he incurs about 2 hours of edit time for every 1 hour shooting. We're going to allocate $400 per year. So you're probably asking how I came up with this. A good way to do this is to go to the internet and just find out how much it would cost for you to rent your same gear. And then we're going to allocate $50 for his computer. I'm making some assumptions here, and this may or may not be different for you, but let's say he gets a new computer every 3 years. He uses that specifically for business purposes. He shoots the 20 weddings per year, so we're going to divide that $3,000 for the computer, divide that by 3 years, and then divide that by 20 weddings, and that is going to come up to $50 per wedding. We're also going to allocate $15 in gas, and that's just for 100 miles in total. and then 15 cents per mile. Using that same approach, we're going to allocate $35 in wear and tear on his vehicle, $30 for insurance. Using the same approach as we did for the computer, we're going to use that for the subscriptions that he has, and those are going to allocate $150 per wedding, $30 for editing software, and then $400 for his second shooter. So that brings his total costs or expenses for that wedding to $1,110. And then he's done his research and experimentation, and he wants to make about $75 an hour for his time. So let's say he spends 45 hours in total for his weddings. The way I got that was his editing time is 32 hours. I think a lot of people kind of forget about this here, that just by having a second shooter and paying for them, that's not your only cost associated with that. You do have to go through their footage and edit it. He spends about an hour packing and unpacking. He's going to have about 2 hours of calls and consultations. And then he spends about 2 hours in the car with traffic. So now you're going to multiply the 45 hours of time, multiply by the $75 per hour, and that's going to bring you to $3,375 for his time, plus the $1,110 for his costs, which brings you to a total of $4,485 is what he should be charging for weddings. So let's say you come up with this price and you think there's no way that you can charge $4,500 for a wedding. Well, you have a couple of different options here. One, you can decrease your profit on the job. Two, you can spend less time on this job. But in a lot of cases for us creatives, that's not something we're going to be willing to do because that's going to result in a poor quality film. As a third option, you can create efficiencies in your business. Maybe you can have somebody else cull your footage that charges a cheaper rate. And then as a fourth option, you can do things in your business that allow you to charge this higher rate, having a better social media presence, learning how to be a better salesman, and then maybe spending more time on your craft and honing that in so that you're able to charge more for your creative vision. Obviously, there's a lot that went into this just to determine your prices, but understanding that this is the way you should think about your business is going to help you tremendously in the long run, not only from the perspective of pricing out your services, but for making decisions on whether or not you should invest in certain equipment. Thinking about it from a time perspective will certainly help you. I do have a tool that I use for me personally. It's something that I can share if you guys are interested. I just need to touch it up so that it's ready for everybody to use. But if that's something you'd be interested, definitely let me know. I'd also love to hear in the comments what other questions you have about pricing, but that's all for this time.